Hello and welcome back to this damn Palladialistic Crusade. This video will be going over the handful of new books I've found in my regular used book hunting on eBay and online and other places. If you've seen my other videos on the same subject, you'll know very well my book collecting never ends. And as Jefferson himself once said, I cannot live without books. And I seem to just accumulate them. I can't help it. But I always primarily focus on film-related books in addition to the number of series books that I still collect and other things, and of course mysteries and anything that catches my fancy or catches my eye. But primarily, as with all my book videos, this will be mostly film books or books even tangentially related to films, and a number of tie-in paperbacks, as I love to find. So first, to just run through the paperback volumes that I stumbled across. This first one, I've heard of this particular series. I think there are only 3 books, but this was a 1980s attempt at creating something in the style of the classic 1930s pulp magazine characters, particularly the heroic or Avenger characters that really pretty much became a cottage industry once the Shadow got established in the Shadow magazine, and then everybody had to copy along with their brother and everyone else. So you had dozens and hundreds of Shadow clones and clones of other characters that came afterwards, like Doc Savage and the Avenger and the Spider and just so on and so forth. So I believe this is from 1986, but this is the first book of the Agent 13 series. So apparently there are 3 of these. I do think there was I guess these were republished at some point, so they are still floating around, but this just looked too fantastic for words. I mean, look at this cover. How does that not grab your attention if you're a fan of pulp stories and pulp characters? It looks great in and of itself, and I am a complete sucker for anything that's in a bargain bin or the less than $1 bin. So this will be fun to check out. I've heard and read some good reviews of these, and again, there are 3 of these. So if this does tickle your fancy, there are at least 2 others before I guess the series ended. Then another novel that I found. This I just got primarily because I'm such a giant fan of the author, and this is apparently one of his non-horror science fiction fantasy novels. But this is the 2002 Richard Matheson novel Hunted Past Reason. This nice tour paperback. Again, I have not gotten to read this, and it is essentially in the vein of stories where 2 people's supposed friends wind up lost in the middle of nowhere in the woods, and things don't go very well. That's all the gist, the blurb on the back gives you. But again, it was just a cheap, clean copy of a Matheson novel, so that meant I had to check it out. Ever since recently rereading The Shrinking Man, and just once again being bowled over at how effective Matheson's prose was, I determined even further to finally read all the Matheson stories and novels that I hadn't gotten to yet. So this was a nice way to chip away at that. Next is a Choose Your Own Adventure book that does tie into a particular collection I've been working on for a number of years, and that is my collection of Indiana Jones books, referring to the novels, not just based around the original character, but also the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles television series. And that got a number of interesting tie-in books, even not just young adult books, but there's actually an actual novel that's a bit darker than the series it's based on. But they also did a number of Choose Your Own Adventure books. So this is in the Bantam line. This is the first of the young indie ones. So this is Valley of the Kings, which I believe is based on, if I can remember the episode title. Yeah, it's based on the episode or mini movie compilation Curse of the Jackal, but it is part of Bantam's Choose Your Own Adventure series and is in the traditional style that you have complete illustrations throughout, and of course full page illustrations throughout. And like any great Choose Your Own Adventure book, you know, you're going to have a varied experience, and these are all, you know, quite difficult to find because they were never reprinted, and especially I'm sure once the indie license was gone, there's no way these are ever going to get reprinted. So I have 1 or 2 of these. There are a variety of young indie books, but again, trying to find all of these, it's not an easy thing to do. So like if you were looking on eBay for them, you're going to get charged more, but every once in a while you stumble across some interesting volumes volumes like this, and I still get a kick out of reading these. I really do, even if it is young indie as opposed to standard adult indie we all know and love. But these books can be quite fun, and if you're trying to collect all the various Indiana Jones tie-in fiction, well, you have to also get all the young indie books as well. Here's another one. It's a different series. This is Random House's attempt. They called it their Find Your Fate series, but it's basically a knockoff on Choose Your Own Adventure. They did 4 of these as a tie-in to the 1985 Bond film A View to a Kill. All of these are incredibly rare, so it was a real surprise to find my second. I've only ever owned 1 of these, so this is now 2 that I have of the 4. But this is the James Bond Find Your Own Fate adventure starring Roger Moore's Bond and a spin-off of A View to a Kill in Win, Place, or Die. They all have great titles like that, of course. I really love these because they have great art renderings of Roger Moore and really nice painted covers. These Find Your Fate books are even harder to find than the more popular, more well-known Choose Your Own Adventure books. And these Bond ones in particular are exceedingly difficult to find. So usually when you find one of these on eBay, it's going to cost you anywhere between $30 and $50 per volume is unfortunately the going rate. So finding 1 in a bookshop, let alone 2, was just a complete surprise treat. And these are quite nice. This one is credited to R.L. Stine of Goosebumps fame. They were all written by different writers, and there's a great section of the Wonderful Lost Adventures of James Bond reference book that was recently done by Mark Edlitz, where he talks to some of the writers of these books. So if you really like that, or if you like these and you want to know more about them, check that section out, which really gives you the whole backstory. And what's also great about these is not only are they great Choose Your Own Adventure books, even though they are Find Your Fate, if you screw up in these, you will actually kill James Bond. That's a really fun, very morbid note to go on. But that is just a sign of these not being your average run-of-the-mill Choose Your Own Adventure book, where if you make a mistake, you just turn the page or you go back. It's not like it's a life or death mistake. Well, these you can do that. Also, they did do a number of Indiana Jones books in this series. So and actually Stine wrote some of those as well. I have 2 of those. There are more indie books than there are the James Bond ones, but all of them that I've found so far are really great and are exceptionally difficult to find. So if you get one of these and you try to get the other ones, you are going to have a significant time in trying to find the rest of them. But they are really well done, essential for any James Bond collection. Next, we move on to paperbacks that are either movie tie-in reprints or movie tie-in novelizations for films, and just going through these alphabetically. This is a book I've wanted to read for a long while because I really love the film that Sidney Lumet made in 1971. That is, of course, the Anderson tapes. This is I think it's from like about 1983. This is a Berkeley reprinting of the original novel, which again, I've never gotten to read. So this was a really nice find. And since I found some of these other books in there, I think somebody who originally owned these and when they tried to do them in must have been a fan of conspiracy thriller films. But it is quite sizable, and I've heard it does vary in a lot of places from the film adaptation. So since I'm so familiar with that, it'll be interesting to finally be able to read the actual novel. This next one I picked up on a whim because it was literally just a couple cents, and it's a tie-in for one of my favorite authors. This is a 1979 vintage movie tie-in of the James and Cain story, The Butterfly, which was turned into a film. I have not yet gotten to see this film, and I've always wanted to because just the idea of Orson Welles somehow starring in an adaptation of a James Cain story just sets my mind afire. But anyway, it's been a while since I've actually read this story. I've got a number of Cain collections, and of course, the most famous novels being Postman Always Rings Twice, Double Indemnity, and Mildred Pierce. All 3 are essential reads, especially Postman most of all, and definitely not shall we say, family friendly, or not for the faint of heart. Kane did not write light stories, shall we say, but this is just a nice little paperback tie-in, and I love tie-ins, so I can't just leave it sitting there. This was a really nice surprise. This one is, of course, a direct novelization of the film. I've always wondered about it, and it's actually quite heftier than I realized. It clocks in at almost 300 pages, but it is the written by Hank Searles, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know which way to pronounce it, but this is the novelization of Jaws 2. Again, quite heftier than I expected, and it's actually in really nice shape. It doesn't have a photo insert in the center or anything like a lot of tie-ins would back then, but this is really from the heyday of really well-done movie tie-in novelizations that a lot of times can improve on the film. And since this is quite hefty, I'm very curious to see what this does with the Jaws 2 storyline. And again, it's a really, really nice shape, so I was very surprised this was just a couple cents. This one was a wonderful surprise, and again, I found it actually on the same shelf spot as Anderson tapes, so whoever originally owned these must have been a fan of both films and conspiracy thrillers. But this one, I know for a fact the book is very different to the film adaptation, and it is a very uncommon book, so I've really been wanting to read it because I really adore the film. And that is the 1974 Dell movie tie-in reprint of the Lawrence Singer novel The Parallax View, again turned into the 1974 masterpiece film directed by Alan Pakula, starring Warren Beatty. But again, I know for a fact this book is very different from what came up in the film. I know there's some really crazy elements that go on in this book, so I am very excited to finally be able to read this. And it's in rather nice shape. It's got the nice sort of glossy feel that a lot of Dell paperbacks have from this time period, and because it's Dell, it has their pretty much trademark green edges, so Dell would do this most often in their 60s and 70s paperbacks, I guess to make them stand out a bit. And of course, Signet had red, while Dell had green edges. But again, it's in really nice shape, and I am just so excited to finally be able to read this. And this goes perfectly with the recently released Criterion Blu-ray edition as well. So if you ever get the chance to, and you love the film, I definitely think checking out the novel is great, because again, I've heard it is supposed to be markedly different in places. Then last, for the trade paperbacks, I finally was able to get a clean copy of the 1978 Warner Books tie-in novel by Elliot Maggin of Superman, Last Son of Krypton. And I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if this retells the events of the first film. Or it has some of the elements, so you will have a little double dipping, but I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a standalone novel. So not only did they have the making of book that they released, which is itself essential and very rare, but they also had this actual novel that was a standalone. It's in really nice shape. Again, some nice glossiness still on the actual cover itself. And like most books of this era, it does have a stills section, a pretty substantial one. Actually, they're all black and white, but as credits on the front, it's a full 16-page stills section just shoved in the middle of the paperback itself. So yeah, I've always wanted to read this. Again, I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be its own standalone novel. I guess, I don't know if it picks up where the film leaves off, or it has some of the same elements depending on where it is in the timeline. But if you're a fan of Superman 78, Superman the movie, the two Donner films, the Christopher Reeve Superman, just the whole Superman the movie realm in general, this is another essential tome to have, and another part of the whole 1978 experience of the first film as part of a Warner's tie-in media package. Next are two more volumes of the really cool and very collectible Pyramid Books History of the Movie series. They all have these matching covers, and they were all part of a series. Each book focuses on a particular actor or actress, famous star, director, so on and so forth. And some of these were written by critics who were just getting their start, or more famous critical names. So again, because these are so well done and they're so jam-packed with beautiful black and white stills, and usually the text is really good too. If I stumble across one of these in good shape, I'm just happy to find another one. This one is one of the ones written by my favorite critical biographer of film personnel, Joseph McBride. So this was much earlier in his critical days, but he wrote a number of these. This is the one he wrote for Kirk Douglas. So again, they all have this nice matching style, nice headshot of the subject of the volume, and then they all match, so they all go together on the shelf. But again, these are really nice little slim volumes. They're very collectible, but again, not only are they jam-packed with really well-printed stills, but the actual text is really well done. And of course, if Joseph McBride writes anything film-related, I have to read it. So I have the one, I believe he also did the one on Orson Welles as well, which I've gone over in another video. But these are also nice little go-to volumes going through the person's career chronologically and focusing on specific titles, but just really well done, well put together. And even though, of course, you can find out most general information on IMDb or the internet in 2 seconds, I still really enjoy this part of film culture when film culture was actually finally getting on its own 2 feet for the first time in the 60s and 70s. And again, these are just really well done, and they are very collectible. So usually when you find them, they do have a little bit of a premium price tag on it. So I do like stumbling across these in used bookshops where they'll just sell them to you for $1 or $2. They also had the Jimmy Stewart one, which I've wanted to read for a while. And being a giant Jimmy fan, of course, you know, I'm happy to read anything about Jimmy. Of course, there's many biographies, all, you know, sort of going over similar material as well, and I've read or owned most of those. But, you know, just getting beautiful stills in a book from the Anthony Mann westerns alone is worth the purchase price, let alone the, you know, famous Hitchcock films and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and just all the great elements of Jimmy's career, but also with a really nice critical write-up throughout. So again, really nicely done. I really enjoy these when I do find them. And again, they are very collectible with good reason. So it's hard to find these for a decent price in good shape, because usually when you find these, they're pretty shot, tattered, missing pages, you know, have tears, or people tore out certain pages for certain pictures. But again, worth it alone for the iconic Stewart film rolls with these beautiful black and white stills. Next is actually a real surprise. I guess, again, somebody was a particular fan of Alec Guinness and had apparently read and traded in their Alec Guinness section from their biographies. So very surprisingly, they had all 3 of Guinness's personal memoirs, starting with the one, I believe this is from 1986. This is the trade paperback of Blessings in Disguise. I've read some of these before. I haven't got to read this one yet, but I have read some of his later ones, which I'll cover in just a second. So this will be fun to finally read his original book of memoirs. And again, really nice volume with a really great photo section in the center. I particularly really enjoyed the doodle of Guinness as Faisal and Lawrence of Ware. So yeah, I'm very excited to finally read his first volume, but of course that was quick. Well, I shouldn't say quickly. It was eventually followed in the late 90s by his second volume, My Name Escapes Me. And of course, I love the titles of these. They're so wonderfully unassuming, but very cheeky. I even love the actual cover. This is the one I've read before. I remember reading it from a library. This one's also really personal because instead of taking the traditional approach of being an autobiography, which he kind of already did in the previous book, this is really actually selections from his diary from the particular year, I believe 95 to 96. So it's basically getting his own mental inner workings at this time when he had not only reached, you know, the end of his career, but it was, you know, I guess what would be termed the twilight years of his life, because he would, you know, pass away not too terribly long after his second and third books were published in the early 2000s, unfortunately. But this was the one I've read before, and it really gives great insight to the man himself and actually allowing this stuff to actually be published. And then he did the same thing in his third book, which, again, great title, A Positively Final Appearance, which has that great dry wit and charm that you get out of these, and his sort of again, how anyone would observe the world around them. This, again, is another sort of compilation of his journals from a particular period, I believe 96 to 1998. So very much like his second book. And again, if you have the second book, you'll want to get this one. So I haven't gotten to read this yet, but I'm sure it's just as good since it's basically a companion piece to the second book. Then they also had the authorized biography of Guinness. This was published in 2003. I have not gotten to read this yet, so this made the perfect time to find all of these, and it still has a Mylar wrap on it. So I was very happy to just get all four of these at once, as I am a giant Guinness fan, meant to read his other books. And actually, I hadn't even realized there was an authorized biography floating around, so this will be a great thing to dive into after the other three. Next, moving on to books that are about specific films or genres. This one, basically, if I see a particular publisher anywhere, particularly in a bargain bookshop, it doesn't matter the subject, it's coming with me. And that, of course, means I found another McFarland volume. McFarland specializes in really intensely well-researched volumes. They do a lot on classic science fiction and horror. Many of the great horror and other film historians have written a number of volumes for McFarland, but you see them a lot in libraries because they look like reference books. They are reference books, and they have reference books pricing. So most McFarland books I've read have been, unfortunately, library copies. So the only ones I actually own are ones I just stumbled across for cheap, like this one. So this is by James Robert Parrish, and it is essentially plots, critiques, casts, and credits for 293 theatrical and made-for-television releases, entitled Prison Pictures from Hollywood. This is like most McFarland books. It is very simplistic, but done like a library reference book. There's no dust jacket or cover. The title and the actual subtitle is printed on, and with really nice binding as well. So if you've ever seen a McFarland book, you'll know this is usually what they look like. The colors will vary, whether it's black, green, red, maroon, blue, but it's rare for them to have a actual dust jacket unless you're buying one on Amazon where they've gone for that route. But again, these are real reference books. They're extremely well printed, and they will, last a lifetime practically. This was put together in 1991 and has, the usual introduction. But basically, each film that's listed gets not just great stills, but a full write-up and analysis, and built around the central theme of all of them being prison films. There are also not just lists for films, but key personnel, whether it be actors, actresses, writers, directors. But again, you get tons of great reference stills, like this one here of Paul Muni in the masterpiece I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. But always in these, even though they're technically books of lists or like encyclopedias, the actual write-ups are extremely informative, highly researched, and well worth your time, even if you know all of these films and shows already. It's just so rare to come across a McFarland book just floating around. I've now had this happen a couple of times, but it's definitely well worth your time anytime you come across a McFarland volume. This next one I was quite surprised to stumble across. It's not a very common volume, and especially not here in the US, where this film is not really remembered all that well outside of fans of it, because it is very much a extremely iconic British film, which is why, of course, we don't have a really good Blu-ray release over here. You're stuck with the Laserdisc and the DVD, or importing the unfortunately DNR-riddled British Blu-ray. But that is the lovely 2001 volume, The Making of the Italian Job, about the original 1969 British classic, of course, starring Michael Caine in one of his most iconic performances. This is written by Matthew Field, who also supervised the DVD extras and is on the, I believe, on the commentary as well. But this is a really nice volume. It's loaded with stills, so it's sort of a mix of the scrapbook type book and the actual highly informative type volume. So it's a mixture of the two, and you get great stills throughout. And it's in this nice, very readable, soft cover, but extended type dimensions. So still fits on a shelf. You can put it out like a coffee table piece, but it's not big and bulky and expensive, something like that. If you've gone over all the extras on the DVD and the Blu-ray, of course, some of that will be had in here as well. But since this is a book, it can go into much more detail and background information as well about not just the film and the cast and crew, but even the Mini Cooper itself. So if you're a fan of The Italian Job, this is a must-own. It's really the book on the film. Of course, literally it is the book. But I don't think it's ever been reprinted, so it's not very common. So this is a really nice surprise to stumble across in the used book racks. And then last but certainly not least, this is a very famous essential reference volume for James Bond fans. Literally, this is the book that eventually got Raymond Benson the writing gig for writing his own continuation James Bond novels in the 90s and 2000s. But this is the original paper-bound, well, I think they were all paper-bound for the most part, printing of Benson's The James Bond Bedside Companion. There was a slightly updated silver cover revised edition, but that's very rare. I've read this many times over and over, but I've never owned a copy because every time I find one that's affordable, it's usually beat to heck or well read and well loved, and the spine is shot and it's worn and everything is just really beat up. But this was a really nice condition copy that's in good shape. Benson has actually gone back and done a more modern, updated version, but it hasn't been printed. So if you buy it on Kindle or you buy the ebook version, it will be the most newly updated version. So if you want to check this out, I think it's usually on sale for about $3 or $4, but nothing is quite like getting the printed copy and again seeing James Bond scholarship where it was in, say, the early to mid 1980s when Benson was putting this together as a labor of love. So this is one of the classic James Bond tomes. It belongs in every James Bond fan's collection, whether you're a fan of the films or the novels or both. And without this, James Bond scholarship would have not gotten to where it is today. It would have taken a heck of a lot longer because, again, this was a real labor of love. So I was very happy to finally find an original copy of this that was not beat to absolute heck. So that's it for this particular book finds video. Again, I try to do these regularly and when I've got a number of interesting books to go over. It's always surprising what you can stumble across in your local bookstore. Never do I think there's going to be anybody who trades in film books or owns even McFarlane volumes around me, but lo and behold, they just manage to turn up here and there. So I always find it a fun experience, and I'll never stop book hunting. And even when I'm not looking for books, they just seem to find me, or people give you books, or you find a book swap, or books are everywhere and always essential. So never turn down a free or a cheap book because you never know how it can enrich your life experience at that point. But as always, I hope this has been informative and enjoyable, and thank you ever so much for watching. Keep supporting your local independent bookstores, keep reading physical books as long as possible, and just plain keep reading.